Okay, good afternoon. Let me share my screen and
Everyone,
get started.
everyone.
Hi, Steve. Question or are you just saying hi? Okay. Everyone see the screen? Yeah, okay? Okay, beautiful. Let's get started. Chapter 11. Laws of sales, got to do with acquisitions and so on and so forth. When a person transfers ownership of an article, whether landed property or movable property, so you're making a sale, and establishes conditions that can be fulfilled, the conditions are binding. So I sell you something, and I say the sale is going to be final if you do such and such. We'll give examples. So if the conditions are fulfilled, then the ownership of the object is transferred. If the conditions are not fulfilled, the ownership of the object is not transferred. Okay? We have already described the laws governing conditional agreements in Hilchot Ishut, so it's a similar type of concept we're applying over here. We'll unpack it a little bit. When does the Vav apply? When a person stated a condition and then carried out a kinyan transferring ownership of the article through one of the accepted procedures. So in other words, you did the kinyan at the time that you said the acquisition will become fully in effect when such condition is met. But the act of kinyan you did at that moment. Okay? For then he's obligated to fulfill the condition. And once the condition is fulfilled, the sale is completed. And in essence, what's happening is retroactively, it becomes the buyer's. If, however, the person did not perform a kinyan, but merely entered into a conditional agreement stating that if this condition is fulfilled, he will transfer ownership. So, I don't know, you look at something that I have and you say you want it. And I say, you know what? It's yours if you run to the beachfront and back. Right? It's a condition that you can fulfill, but you don't make obviously you can't, well, only some of us can fulfill it, sorry. I'm sitting a block away from the beachfront, so that's the example that came up. But something you can fulfill, run to the corner and back, right? So here's the thing. Even though it's a condition that you can fulfill, and you go ahead and fulfill that condition, there is no transfer of ownership. There's no sale, okay? And what we're going to, and we'll see this emphasized a few times. Let me just clarify the point over here. It is as follows. Then in order for a kinyan, and this concept we had before, in order for a sale to take place and for the acquisition to have occurred, you need the complete intention of both the buyer and the seller that I'm relying on this, that this is what's happening, right? If, however, I say to you that if you do such and such, this thing will be yours, right? Just because you do such and such, it doesn't become yours. Why? Because whenever I stipulate a condition, even if it's a condition that you are able to achieve, there's always a small amount of doubt. Maybe you're not going to do it. And therefore, I haven't fully committed to go through with this transfer, this acquisition, this sale. In the first case, which we described, where you actually make the kinyan, right? Because you're doing an active acquisition at the moment of transfer, which is a tangible expression of my willingness to go through with this transaction, and then you make it conditional. So really what happens is once the condition is fulfilled, it's almost like retroactively the acquisition took place. It's something that can undo the acquisition as it were, but it can't fully, and it can confirm the acquisition, but it can't fully be the process of acquisition because you don't have, at the moment of agreement, an active acquisition. Whereas in the case where I first make the acquisition, you do some type of kinyan, whatever is appropriate for the particular thing that you're selling, and then you add a condition. If it's a condition that's fulfillable and then it's fulfilled, then the thing is completed. So he says, because if you make a condition without an acquisition, it's what we call, this is considered an asmachta, meaning he made his transfer of ownership dependent on a performance of a certain deed. And asmachta is never binding. Why? For the person transferring ownership to not make a firm decision, it's not he hasn't, the phrase is gomar belibo, he hasn't firmly decided that the transfer of ownership will take place. Why is it not a firm decision in his heart? Because so long as the condition hasn't been fulfilled, there's always the possibility that it won't be fulfilled, and therefore there's always the possibility that the transfer won't take place. So let's give practical example. Ketzad. The person sold a house to a colleague or gave it to him as a present on the condition that the recipient traveled to Jerusalem with the seller on a given day. Now, if the recipient manifests ownership over the house, either by living in it or some other way of making chazaka, and then he goes ahead, he acquires it when he travels to Jerusalem with the seller on the date stated. If that day passes and he did not make the journey, he does not acquire it. Okay? But if he fulfilled the condition retroactively, it says, if however the owner made a condition and told the potential purchaser, he said that if you go with me to Jerusalem on this day, or if you bring me this article, I will give you this house, or I will sell it to you at such and such a price. So although the person travels with him on that day or brings in the article, he does not acquire the house just on the fulfillment of that condition, right? Again, because it's just an asmachta, because no acquisition took place at the moment when the intention was there. This applies even if the potential purchaser manifests his ownership over the house after he fulfills the condition. For this is an asmachta. You can't say, I came along, I fulfilled the condition, and then go in there and make the chazakah because I fulfilled my condition. No, because you need the committed intention of both the buyer and seller, which you didn't have at the point of the acquisition. The same law applies to all analogous situations. Halacha 4. For this reason, the following rules apply if a purchaser gives security to a colleague and tells him. So as follows, right? I'm giving you something to hold on my behalf, some type of deposit. So maybe I'll say like this: I'm going to sell you something, and I give you something extra with it to hold as security. He says, if I retract, I'll waive ownership of the security in your favor. Sorry, or you lend money, right? He gives you a security and to hold on condition that you make a repayment or something, right? So he says, if I retract, I'll waive the ownership of the security in your favor. And the seller says, so the seller says, if I retract, I will double your security. So if the purchaser retracts, so I bought something, I'm giving you something to hold until I pay you, right? Right? And I say, if I retract, you own that thing that I'm giving you. So if the purchaser retracts, so I took something I wanted to buy and I say, no, actually I don't want it anymore. The seller automatically acquires the security because it is in his possession. He's already acquired it and it's in his possession. But if the seller retracts, remember the seller said, if I retract, I'll give you double the amount of the security. We did not require him to double the security, for his promise was an asmachta and is not binding. In other words, because the purchaser has no acquisition on what he's promised, and because it was only a conditional thing which could have or could not have taken place, it's not an absolute commitment. There's no gomar b'liboy, basically, and therefore he doesn't have to pay the double amount. Halacha 5. A similar principle applies if a debtor paid a portion of a debt and the creditor entrusted the promissory note to a third party after the debtor made the following statement: if I do not pay the remainder until such and such a date, return the promissory note. Okay, so I borrowed money from David. David has right? I borrowed money from David. You've got a note that says I'm going to pay you back, right? And I come and I pay you part of it back. And you give me the promissory note and I give it to a third person. And I say, if I don't pay the remainder by such and such a date, then give it back to David. Now, what's going to happen is like this, because let's say I borrowed 100 Rand and I paid you 25 Rand back. Really, your claim on me is only 75 Rand. We don't make a new note. We take that original note, we give it to John, and we say, John, you hold this till such and such a date. If I don't pay David back, then give it back to David. Now, what happens is now David can all of a sudden claim the full 100 again because that's what he's got. Okay. In other words, I'm making a conditional that I'll pay you back on time. Otherwise, essentially, I'm promising you that you're going to get 25% more, right? So I've given it to John. See, if the date arrives and the debtor did not pay, the third party should not give the promissory note to the creditor, for this agreement is also an asmachta, right? Because David, I haven't actually transferred anything yet at that time, and it's a conditional thing. So because my intention is not tied at the moment to an acquisition, then John won't give it to David so that he would end up claiming more from it. Halacha 6. Similarly, all the conditions that people establish between themselves, even when confirmed by witnesses and a legal document, for example, if such and such will take place, or if you do such and such, I will give you a mana, which is a certain amount of money, or I will transfer ownership of this house to you. But if it does not take place, or if you do not do such and such, I will not transfer ownership, or I'll not give you such and such. All of these are only considered asmachta, even if it's written and even if it's in the presence of witnesses. Because again, what you're telling you're going to give and the moment of acquisition don't come together. And because at the moment that I'm suggesting that there'll be some type of transfer, it's conditional, there's no absolute intention. Even though the potential recipient performs a desired act or the event occurs, he does not acquire the promised article, for his intent is undefined, being dependent on whether or not the stipulation will be met. Okay.
But Rabbi, this is in a legal document.
It's not illegal. Wasn't it illegal?
With witnesses.
The point is not that, firstly, we said either with witnesses, in other words, by statement, or I've written it down in a legal document. So it doesn't say illegal. It's a legal document.
Yeah.
The point is, though, it does not.
Why is it an asmachta if it's a legal document?
Asmachta means that it's not an absolute commitment of intention. So therefore, even though it's a legal document, there's no reason not to write it, but it's not something you can claim on. Because just because I put it into a document doesn't mean that an acquisition occurred. Because the only way an acquisition can occur is if the act of acquisition and the committed intention happen at the same time. And that's the difference in all these situations. If I'm promising you something on condition that you do something and you don't actually do an act of acquisition at that time, so even though you fulfilled the condition, there was no acquisition that took place. And even if you do that acquisition at the end of it, because at the moment that I committed to it, my mind was not fully committed because there was always the possibility the condition wouldn't be fulfilled, it's not a valid acquisition. Now, you might listen, it doesn't mean that you wouldn't then go ahead and do a further acquisition and so on and so forth. It just means the transfer has not been effected yet. In other words, if I'm an honest guy and I say to you, I guess you'd call it honest, and I say, if you do such and such, I'm going to give you this house, right? It would probably be the right thing for me to do once you did go do that thing, to actually give you the house. But something further will need to take place in order for that transfer to go to you. It wouldn't just be automatic because you fulfilled the obligation. That's the point here.
This tells us that these conditions are in the legal document and in front of witnesses. I still don't. But anyway, that's understand the principle. Thanks.
The point is that it's not illegal. It's just not effective for this purpose. Just because something's not effective for one purpose doesn't make it illegal, right? It's not effective to bring about the transfer of ownership and acquisition. It doesn't make it illegal. I hope that's...
what is the point of the document then?
What is the point of it? Because you stated an intention. It doesn't really matter what the point of the document is. It may make no sense. The point of the document is, I don't know what the point of the document is, but the point is that even if you made a document, it does not affect the acquisition or the transfer. Okay.
Okay.
And sometimes that's really why he's bringing this. The reason why he's saying this is actually the way I understand it, is to clarify that point. Often, right, we'll use an example that is somewhat extreme, like here, where you're writing a document that ultimately won't even be, you can't even collect on. But the point is, though, even though you've written, you can't collect on it. And therefore, it emphasizes this concept that anything that is conditional is simply asmachta, because your intention is not complete at the time of later when the acquisition takes place, or when the acquisition ought to take place. Okay, and now he goes back to emphasize the other side. So what is the only way to do it then? Whenever a person says acquire an entity upon fulfillment of a condition retroactive to the present time, it is not considered an asmachta at all, and the transaction is binding. For if the person had not made a definite commitment to transfer ownership, he would not have transferred ownership retroactive to the time of the agreement. He's really explaining what we've been talking about. At the time that you do when you give the thing to the other person, you must say, you're acquiring this on condition that you'll do such and such. Really, what you're saying is that this moment, retroactive, will be the moment that it's yours from. Okay? And that's fine, because as soon as I'm putting it in your hand, I am expressing or allowing you to pull it, or whatever the method of acquisition is. As soon as you're doing that, then I'm giving effect to, and I'm showing what my true intent is. And I have I'm allowed to make the thing conditional, as long as you agree and as long as it's a condition that you can fulfill. And that's what happens. And then you go do that, and then retroactively, it's this moment where I've made clear my intention and where you actually did the acquisition when the transfer takes place.
Okay, thank you.
What is implied if a person says, if I return between now and such a date, you acquire this house retroactively to the present time, and his commitment is affirmed by Kinyan, remember, the transaction is binding if it returns within the set time. Same applies with regard to all similar situations. So there's a stated intention and a Kinyan. On top of it, there's a condition which needs to be fulfilled. Halacha 8, when a person sells a courtyard or a field and specifies, this is an interesting scenario. So I'm selling you my house or my field or my courtyard, and I tell you, I'm selling this because I need this money now. Why do I need this money now? Because I need to go travel somewhere, or because there's been a drought and I need to go and buy wheat with this money. It is considered as if you sold the property conditionally. What does that mean? Therefore, if it rained after you made the sale, so I sold my field, and I told you the reason why I'm sending my field to you is because there's no produce, because it hasn't rained, and I'm going to use this money to go and buy barley or whatever. And then all of a sudden you have a week of rain. It's considered as if the sale was conditional, and I can come back to you and say, here's your money, give me back my field. Because you knew that the only reason I was selling was because I was desperate, and because I told you that I'm selling it for that reason, right? Or if he was prevented from traveling to that land, right? Or factors did not facilitate his journey or his purchase of wheat, then the seller may return the money he received and have the land returned to him. For he stated that he was selling the property only for the sake of performing a specific act, and the act was not performed. Similar principle applies in all analogous situations, right? If a person sells land property without making an explicit statement, the sale is fine, even though he had the intent in his heart that he was selling the property for a particular reason. So you went to bed one night and you woke up in a cold sweat and you said, I don't have produce. I better go and sell my land so I can go and buy some produce. So you put it on the market, and somebody comes to buy it. And in your head, the whole time you're thinking, I'm selling this only so I got some cash flow to go and buy some produce, but you never say it explicitly. Even though it was your intention, if you didn't say it, the sale is final. And this is true even if it's apparent that he's selling the property for that reason. Meaning you can see he's desperate, and you see he attempts to go to the market right away. The rationale is that he did not make an explicit statement. And thoughts, this is the point, halachic, right? Thoughts in a person's heart are of no consequence in business transactions. You know, you got to tell me what you want. You can't assume that I can read your mind, you know. The following rules apply, halacha 10. If one transferred ownership of an entity to a colleague and stipulated that he acquired on condition that he give or sell that entity to another person. Okay, it's a funny situation, but I'm selling it to you only that you can sell it or give it to somebody else. If the person gives or sells the entity to that third person, the transaction is binding. If he does not fulfill the stipulation and sells it on to another person, or does not give it, or does not give or sell it to the person intended within the time frame established, the original transaction is not binding. Meaning the guy can come and take it back. He can't say, "Oh, I bought it, it's mine." I said, "No, I sold it to you only so that you would sell it on to so and so." And if the time comes and you didn't, well, we can come and we can undo that deal. Similarly, if the seller or the purchaser of an article establishes a condition that the article be returned at a specific time or returned at that time in exchange for money, the transaction is binding. The article must be returned as stipulated. So I sell you something on condition that you sell it back to me in a month's time. That's binding. That's stipulated, and you've got to, you know, it's yours for the month, but then you must sell it back to me at the end of the month. Halacha 11. Different rules apply in the following situation. A person sold land and property to a colleague. The seller made a stipulation saying, when I acquire money, return this land to me. Okay, so here's interesting. What he says, the produce of the land belongs to this seller. So I own a piece of land. I sell it to you. And I say to you, when I make some money, I want to buy it back. what becomes very apparent is it's that I need the cash now, and when I can afford it, I want to buy it back. In other words, it's almost like a loan. Really what I need is a loan because I'm out of cash flow. But I was too embarrassed to ask for a loan or something. I wanted to sell. So now, once you agree that you're going to sell it back to me once I have money, right? So what happens is, while you own my field, that field is producing fruit. But if you, as the one who's now owns this field, start also eating the fruit from the field, so what it looks like is, it looks like you are benefiting from a loan. It looks like you're charging interest of me. So if the sale was such that I'm selling it to you until I have the money to rebuy it, then I, as the seller, still maintain the rights to the fruit, not you as the buyer. Otherwise, it looks like you as the buyer are someone who's granted me a loan and you are taking interest on that loan by benefiting from the produce of the field. That's what we're concerned about, that it looks like that. So therefore, you can do that sale, that type of conditional sale, but the seller retains the rights to the fruit. If the seller made the sale without stipulating a condition and the purchaser set it on his own volition, so let's say I'm selling my field and the buyer is sensitive to the fact why I'm selling. And he says to me, when you acquire funds, bring them to me and I'll return this property. That stipulation is binding, meaning because the buyer said he'll do it, it is binding, and the sale now takes place basically conditional on that. But in this situation, then the person can derive benefit from the purchaser can derive benefit from the property, and doing so is not considered a vak ribus or a shade of interest, because the purchaser voluntarily obligated himself by this condition. Unlike in the first clause of this halakha, where the seller makes this condition, then it looks like the buyer is just simply gaining off a loan, and that we want to avoid. Okay. Halakha 12. An incident occurred concerning a woman who sent an agent. So what happened? She sends Reuven to purchase a courtyard for her from one of her relatives, Shimon. Shimon, the seller, said to Reuven, the agent, if I acquire funds, so-and-so, my relative, shall return this property to me. Reuven answers him, you and so-and-so are relatives. You're so close. You are like brother and sister. Meaning, it is if he was saying, it's very likely that she'll return it to you and that she will not show concern about such a matter. It's almost as if he's saying, yeah, that condition is self-understood, right? But Reuven is saying, as an agent, is saying it on behalf of this woman. So now the question is, what happens? Is that considered conditional sale, basically? Right? The previous halacha says, if I sell you something on condition that you sell it back to me when I have the money, that's a perfectly fine condition, and that's binding on both sides. But here you had a lady who sent a shliach to buy something from a relative. And the relative says, and he says, okay, I want to buy it back from her, though, when I have money, right? And the shliach says, well, you guys are relatives. I'm sure that would be fine with her. So now the question is that considered a condition, and is it binding or not? So they brought the matter to the Chachamim, and they ruled that the agent did not purchase anything. They said the whole thing is undone, because the guy thought it was conditional, but it's not a condition that he actually had the right to make. For the relative selling the field did not rely on the agent's words, since they were not a clear reply. Therefore, the seller did not make a final decision to transfer the ownership. Similar principle apply in all analogous situations. Okay? He answered somewhat wishy-washy, assuming that it might be like that, but that's not clear enough. And therefore, there was no absolute commitment to the condition. And because there's no real clear condition, there's no real clear sell either. Halacha 13. When a kinyan confirming an asmachta is made in a prominent court, it is considered as binding. This applies provided the person involved entrusts the legal documents involved to the court, and provided he is not acting under duress. What's an example? Person entrusted his promissory note or his receipt to the court and engages in a kinyan, stating that if he does not come by such and such a date, the promissory note shall be given to the other litigant. If the date arrives without the person's coming, the note should be given. Okay, so even though we said earlier when it was private people, you wouldn't. If it's done in the presence of the court, it would be given. If he was prevented from coming, okay, so that's if he chose not to come. If he was prevented from coming by a river or by illness, then the promissory note should not be given to the other litigant, because that was an inus. Obviously, we extend his possibility to come and do right on his commitment. Similar principles apply in all analogous situations, provided that this is done in the presence of a prominent court. Halacha 15, when a person undertakes a financial obligation to another person without making any stipulation. So up until we're talking about you made a sale or there was some transfer, somebody owed somebody something. What happens if somebody takes upon themselves an obligation? I'll make a commitment, I'm going to give so-and-so 100 Rand. You don't owe me 100 Rand, I don't owe you 100 Rand. There's no reason other than the fact that I'll make a commitment. So, and no stipulation. I'm going to give so-and-so 150 Rand. I'm going to give so-and-so 1,000 Rand. I'm going to give charity 1,800 Rand to such an organization. You make that commitment. He becomes liable, though he did not owe that person anything previously. He is giving him a present and is not an asmachta. Right? Even though there's no mechanism that forced me to owe it that person, it's not considered an asmachta. It's my commitment and it's a present. What's implied? What's an example? A person tells witnesses, serve as witnesses that I owe so-and-so a mana. Tells them, makes the commitment. I owe, what's his name, 100 Rand. He composes a legal document that states that he owes the other person a money, even though it is not observed by the witnesses. Oh, sorry, this is an alternate way. Or he writes down this thing, right? Not in the presence of witnesses, but he writes on a document, I owe so-and-so 180 Rand. Or he told another person in the presence of witnesses, I owe you a mana, as recorded in a legal document. In the latter circumstances, even though he did not tell the witnesses to serve as witnesses, since he said, as recorded in a legal document, it is as if he told them, serve as witnesses that I am obligated. Even though both parties admit, and the witnesses know, that the giver did not owe the recipient anything, and as the only thing that makes it the only thing that makes it binding is his own word, he accepts an obligation upon himself and he becomes liable, as a guarantor does. The majority of the Goinim ruled in this manner. So you make that commitment in the presence of witnesses, or you write it in a document, you become liable to pay that out. Following rules apply when a person accepts an obligation upon himself that is unlimited in nature. Okay, so for example, he says, I obligate myself to feed you. So right in Halacha 15, we said you can take an obligation on yourself, it becomes binding. I'm going to give you 100 Rand. If I say that in the presence of witnesses or write that down, I got to give you 100 Rand. What if I say I'm going to feed you, I'm going to clothe you for 5 years. So there's no absolute amount attached to it. So even though he affirms his commitment to the recipient with a kinyan, he's not liable. So if I told you I'm going to provide you with food for the next 5 years, even if I make a kinyan, I'm not liable. For this resembles a present, and yet there's no specific and known entity that is being given giving as a present. He said, my master ruled in this manner. So when it's very clearly definable, you're held liable to make that payment, to gift that, and so on. But when it's less definable, that is not binding. Halacha 17, if so, why is the person who makes the commitment to his wife to provide food for her daughter from a previous marriage obligated to provide for her? Is that not like saying an unquantified gift, which we just said one's not obligated for? So he says that's different because he made his commitment at the time of their marriage, and the matter resembles entities that are required, although only a verbal commitment is made. And those things are binding in the process of the marriage. Halacha 18, when the sages of Spain desired to make a kinyan with regard to an asmachta, they would adhere to the following guidelines. They would establish a kinyan with one party. Then he is obligated to the other party 100 zuz. After he has undertaken such an obligation, a kinyan is made with the person to whom he indebted himself, that as long as this and this condition prevails, or if he does such and such, the obligation is waived, effective retroactively to the time of the agreement. But that if this condition does not prevail, or if he does not do such and such, he will sue him for the payment of the money for which he obligated himself. This is a procedure that is followed in all stipulations that are made between the man and his wife with regard to engagement and other similar matters. So they're conditional, but we connect it to those commitments. Okay, question time, up for the quiz. If a person sold a piece of land and specified the reason why he is selling it, may he demand the property back if his reason for selling it goes away?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes is correct, right? Would the law in the previous question's case change if the person did not specify the reason, but it was clear from his actions why he was selling it?
Yeah.
Yes. It would change, right? That's not binding, because just as though it was your intention, even if they are clear, it's not good enough, because Dvarim Shebelev Enum Dvarim is the rule. Matters don't count. When a person sells a property to someone with a stipulation that when he gets the funds to buy it back, it will return to him, is such a stipulation valid? So we got some options here. Yes, but until he brings the money, the buyer fully owns the field and its produce belongs to him. B, yes, and the produce belongs to the seller. B, no, the buyer may keep the property for himself and he need not return it.
Number 2.
Number two.
Number 2, right? So it is a sale, but the seller keeps the produce, again, because otherwise it would be like the buyer is charging interest on a loan. It would be
Yeah.
similar to that. When a person obligates himself to support someone for a certain period of time, is he obligated to abide by his commitment? Yes, no, or only if he made a kinyan.
I don't think he's fine. I don't think so.
No.
Say yes. I think not.
Stay.
Right? We said it. If it's because it's an unclear stipulation ultimately, there's nothing to hold him to really. You know, there's not a specific to hold him to, and therefore it's not a binding. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Rabbi.
Thanks,
Thanks very much, Rabbi. Cheers, everyone.